when it was. What were your days? What were your years that you put in to local radio, WMOA?
Well, I started my I got thrown out of Marietta College after the first semester of my sophomore year.
Oh, wow.
And I found out that rum went with Coke and women were really kind of fun to hang around with. And going to class was kind of got in the way of my social activities.
Not much has changed.
But I came back and decided to major in radio TV, and Marietta College didn't have a mass communication major back in those days, so the closest you could come was majoring in speech, which is what I did, and I think Ernie Hartong did as well. Now, of course, it's a mass communications major, and it's Marietta College is doing great, as you know.
Uh-huh.
But my first job was at Parkersburg at WTAP as kind of the night guy riding the board, and most of it was doing my homework while monitoring Cincinnati Reds games in the summer, and West Virginia University games in the fall and winter. And then one day, but I think Ernie worked at WMOA, and I got a call saying to come in and talk to Ray Rosenblum and Larry Steinel because they were looking for a news director, about which I knew nothing. But I pretended I did because Ernie and I were roommates, and we lived just down the block from the station, and I could walk to work as opposed to a 30-minute trip down to Parkersburg every night. And I got the job, and I went down to cover the mayor, John Burnworth, one day, and Jerry Kondo was the Marietta Times reporter who's since deceased, but a wonderful reporter who went to the University of Missouri and actually knew how to be a reporter. And he watched me for one session with Burnworth, and he called me aside and he said, "You're doing it all wrong." And Jerry taught me how to be a reporter, and I turned out to be a pretty good one.
That's
and I was the kind of reporter that when the school board met in their reading sessions, and I'd show up, they said, "Who told him about this?" Which I saw as a bit of pride. And I've always been what I call a Trotskyite Republican, which doesn't mean anything, but it's fun to say. And so I was always a little bit on the edge. And at some point, Brett, I asked Ray and Larry if I could write a daily commentary, and they thought about it because it's this is a small station, small town, and feelings are easily hurt. And I think, they said yes. So I practiced for about a week and a half, and they approved the scripts. And I've always been a pretty good writer. And John, your dad, Big John was your dad?
Big John was my grandfather.
Oh my God, your grandfather! Well, he could sell the rust on a pickup, so he sold it, and I think he sold it to Bob Engler Ford. So it was a moneymaker for the station. And I started doing a daily commentary, which became very popular. But it's as anybody who writes for a living knows, you write whatever you're going to write, and it's like weight behind the boat. But as soon as you're finished, it goes away. And I'd go downtown to start my rounds after doing the morning version, and people would say, "Well, about what you wrote this morning," and I'd say, "What did I write this morning?" And they'd look at me like I grew a forearm out of my forehead. But it was a wonderful experience, and since then I've written, for over 22 years, I've written a column on the internet called Mullings, and it got its start at WMOA, Marietta, Ohio, 1490 on your AM dial.
There you go. I love that. Just those stories that all come back to right here on top of the hill. And I got to say, Rich, I found one of your blogs online when you turned 65. Do you remember that from 2011?
I remember turning 65, but I don't remember what I wrote.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's fairly interesting. I did learn a lot about what happened and what was going on at Marietta College with your report card, if you will. And it was just kind of a way to turn 65 and how you felt when you thought that, 30 years old was old to you when you, of course, were a younger man. And now you're giving your look between then and when you turned 65. And now I believe that was a December birthday, correct?
Yeah, December 21st.
Yeah, there you go. So you were almost as old or as young as this radio station. How about that?
Yeah, that's right. And of course, I didn't know about it at the time. I didn't know about Marietta until I came to go to college there. Yeah. I grew up on Long Island in New Jersey.
I see. I do want to introduce you to another person. This is my co-host, Jacob Krantz, who is in the studio with us. He was tasked with doing sports today, the 750 sports, and he's been kind of in the production studio working on a few things. But Jacob, meet Rich.
Rich, it's a pleasure, and I just wanted to start with just the illustrious career that you've had from the homework that I've done, and coming from WMOA to being a guest on MSNBC, NBC, ABC, and even with the late Larry King, kind of talk about that transition into starting that small-time column and then it really hitting and going big time. Kind of talk about your career post Marietta and how Marietta contributed.
Well, working at a station like WMOA, where, as you have done already this morning, you do a little bit of everything.
Oh, yeah.
I was not afraid of a microphone. I learned how to, we I don't know how you program today, but everything we did was with a live, now we call it disc jockey, or we used to be called disc jockeys. But we didn't have a playlist, but we had to talk to the audience and keep them entertained. So being in front of a microphone and being able to ad-lib like that were lessons I learned right there on Harmer Hill, and I just carried them over to TV, which is a lot easier, frankly, unless you're running the board there too. But because the way TV works, you get the call to come in, you get made up, you sit in the green room with everybody, you go on the air for it's like 4.5 minutes. You go back outside, you get your makeup taken off, and go back to work. So you're doing 2 hours of nothing for 4.5 minutes on the air. And I always said I could do 4.5 minutes standing on my head after doing a morning shift on Christmas morning at WMOA.
Oh yeah. And with that, just selfishly asking, as I currently go to the Scripps School of Journalism at OU, I want to know, sitting high atop Harmer Hill, as you mentioned, did you ever think that it would lead you to being a press secretary for the vice president? Being a young man from Marietta College, and as you said, it wasn't really even a communications department. Could you have ever seen where your career would take you? No,
of course not. It was. I mean, one of the things in life, is I think we all know, is it's not just enough to have opportunities presented to you. It's being lucky enough to know when to say yes to the opportunity. What happened with me is I used to have lunch at what was called the Bank Restaurant back in those days. And it was right across the street. Well, it was under the bank, which became Dime Bank, across the street from the People's Bank. With some of the town elders, they let me sit with them every day for lunch. And one day it happened to be filing deadline day for the city council. And there was an opening for a Republican, I wrote about this too, I think, a Republican at-large seat in the primary. And they kind of teased me into walking across the street. I didn't have $5, which was the filing fee at the time. And they threw $5 on the table, which is my first and last illegal campaign contribution. But I think the statute of limitations is run on that. Anyway, I walked over across the street to the Board of Elections, and I asked for the paperwork to sign up. And they said, "Are you a Republican or a Democrat?" And I said, "Well, I have to be a Republican because that's where the opening is." Anyway, I lost that race to John Grayson of Grayson Lumber by 2 votes, 902 to 900. Came back 4 or so years later, married, and my wife ran my campaign, and I won a seat to be a city councilman. And it was that taste of politics, not the serving, which is always a pain, but the running for office, which is great fun. And the fact that I'd covered races as the news director and the only news person that it was, whose job it was to be the news guy, that I got interested in politics, and it came to pass that we had a son, Reed Galen, who's now made his own name and fame in the political world as one of the co-founders of the Lincoln Project. But we decided that we would that I would go to Washington, D.C., and see if I could get a job on the Hill being a press secretary, and I did, and everything flowed from there. But it was clearly covering city council, covering the mayor's office. I mean, covering John Burnworth was like a Rhodes Scholarship in reporting. But again, it all goes back to WMOA. That without my background as the news director there, I would never have gotten a taste for politics, political reporting, and what have you.
Yeah, absolutely so. And, that is the position I'm in right now, and I love everything about it. But similar to what you said, it's just I really didn't have any idea what I was doing when I got here. And all of a sudden, it was a couple of years had gone by. I was directing, I was reporting, and I was presenting, which was, three separate things almost sometimes, And I'm not sure if it was the same for you. Who else was in the news department alongside you?
Nobody. I was it. Everybody took their, Who's one of your guests? Not Sam. Tell me the guests the rest of the week.
Throughout the rest of this week, we're actually having 4 or 3 this week. Now I think it might be 4 as we get closer to the
Dick
end.
Sams is who I was trying to pick.
Dick Sams, John Richardson, Dan Latham.
Dick was the mid-morning guy, as I remember, but he was also a volunteer EMT guy. So he would file stories that he ran across. Bill White and Ernie Hartong in their times would file if they came across something, or if I was doing something else or out of town. So again, it's like WKRP in Cincinnati. Everybody had a job, principal job, but even now, if you look at the WMOA webpage and you see everybody's got a slash after their job title and what else they do. And to what you were describing, not only would I do the news, but then you'd head to the production studio and cut spots.
Yeah, it's definitely many hats are to be worn here, and sometimes we have to trade them off.
It's a great experience, and you can't get that kind of experience at a big-time station in Columbus or Cleveland or Cincinnati because you have your lane, and if you step out of your lane, you're stepping into somebody else's. But at a station like Marietta, everybody pitches in to help out.
And Rich, I just want to hear some of the great stories. I won't go on the political side of what happened at Roswell and who was on the grassy knoll, but at WMOA in Marietta, what are just some things that you think back to, whether it's Big John with those sales stories or other things that may have happened, and you said that really just summed up my time at Marietta, or those are some of the things that I miss?
Well, the thing is that Larry Steinle and Ray Rosenblum had a great amount of patience with me because I was kind of a skunk in the game. One time I was on the air. Again, I would fill in for if somebody needed time off or was out of town or was sick on the board, and I decided it would be fun to, in one afternoon shift, there was a police car parked outside watching for people coming around the corner going down the hill, and they had a speed trap. So I said, there's a speed trap right outside the station, so if you're coming in that direction, slow down because you can't see the car until you get the police car until you get there. Well, the police chief called the station just furious about the fact that I kind of sprung their trap for them. And my answer was, look, what do you want to do, arrest people or keep speeders down? And if I can help you keep speeders down, I should get an award, not a yelling at.
There you go.
I would do things like that with some regularity and get in trouble. One time I did a Rich Galen comments, this 1 minute and a half commentary about the school board, and the sponsors of the program got so mad they threatened to pull their sponsorship if I didn't tame down my criticism of. I know it was the Chamber of Commerce, which I routinely made fun of, but Ray and Larry said, cancel your sponsorship. We're not going to allow the sponsors to drive our programming. And again, in a small town, a small station where sponsors aren't that easy to come by, they really get a lot of credit from me for standing up for me. I think I probably did watch my writing, but I would do things like one time we had the water tower out at I-77 got, I think, a new water tower was erected, and there was some discussion in town about what the message ought to be. And I went through this whole thing John Burnworth was long gone as mayor. Jim Schweikert was mayor at the time, as I remember. And I said, if John Burnworth were still mayor, this would not be an issue. In 17-foot letters, it would say, "Welcome to Marietta, John A. Burnworth, Mayor." And then I signed off, and that may have been one of the more popular ones I ever did. And I always signed off. Everyone was, "This is Rich Galen, WMOA. Views and opinions expressed on this program are my own and do not necessarily reflect those of the ownership, management, or staff." And I can guarantee you it reflected none of the views of the ownership, management, or staff.
Right. You have to disclaim, though. There's always something in that makes people realize, okay, yeah, this is just Rich talking, huh?
That's right.
Yes.
I think probably from a legal standpoint it didn't have any standing, but it made me feel like a big-time, broadcaster.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, you get to spin those things off. You get your own personal sign-off. It really does kind of make you feel like you are just doing it, doing everything right there. It gives you a bit of identity here on the radio. And what I want to know about, and some things that other people want to know about in the radio station are, what kind of other programming shows can you think about? I'm thinking of one with Bill White, and I think he brought this one up early in the month. He was one of our first three, I think, that stopped up to the station for these alumni interviews. So what do you remember of Bill White, and did you spend any time with him on the air?
Oh, yeah. Well, Bill's been one of my best friends for decades and decades and decades, and as you know, he just recently lost his wife. Mm. But what we wanted to do it on a talk show on the air, and we needed to figure out a way to do a delay, and we didn't have much any electronic way to do it. So what Bill figured out was that in the old control room to the left of the board was a reel-to-reel Ampex, a big brown, ugly monster, and we figured out that if we used a closed loop of audio tape, it took about 7 or 8 seconds to get around both reels and come back where we would erase the last revolution and pick up the new revolution. And we practiced literally for weeks to get the timing right. Mm-hmm. If somebody cursed on the air or did something like that, so we could in effect bleep it out. And it worked. And that nighttime show was great. We had a great time with it. It had I think we did it on both. Back in those days, we dropped down to 250 watts at night, mm-hmm. which meant that the sheriff's cars had more power than WMOA had. But we simulcasted on the FM side as well, so we had a great reach. And Bill figured that out almost entirely by himself. But it was a very successful show and fun to do. And
then another one that I'm seeing here. Our program director, Ben Marshall, he said fish program with Ernie Hartong. Can you think back to that one and give us a little insight on that?
What was the program?
I see on the sheet it says fish program. Now, I believe this would have been with the now owner of the Belpre Aquarium or someone thereabouts. There was like an aquarium or a fish store in downtown Marietta. Was there a program on WMOA that involved that?
If Ernie says there was, but I've forgotten about it. I don't remember.
I think Ernie has spoken, and he said that it existed. So I think we're going to have to maybe get some more.
We'll have to have both. You have to have both of us on, and we can reminisce together. But Ernie and Bill and people like Dick Sams. I mean, Steinle, of course, was the backbone of the station. I mean, he did so many different things, including the morning show. But it was really a collection of people that really had little assets in terms of the electronic stuff that you have today, but they made up with it in the heart and the dedication to the listening public, and it was real unquestionably the most valuable job I ever had given what a success I've had since.
Well, it's amazing. And, I'd love to hear that, how good WMOA has treated people, past, present, and hopefully well into the future, Jacob. And, I can already feel that is the reality in my life. And I'm sure that, the experience that you get here will help you out later in life, too.
Yeah, and just especially speaking to people like Rich Galen, to where I aspire to have a career, half the career that he's had, and whatever avenue this business takes me, I don't want the listeners out there to take for granted these conversations of memories of old times past and see how they've shaped the community, and we continue to do. So, Rich, I really appreciate your time today, and we just thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me on, and best to everybody at the station, and my best to everybody downtown in Marietta.